transparent, like the motive there was transparent. We need some more women with AIDS, right? So that was a good way to get some women. But except for that one, I say all those other things, really, the way they came about in the 80s and the late 70s were as a result of a fairly experimental lifestyle, okay? What particular aspects of that lifestyle caused them, I don't know. It's hard to figure it out. For any one of them, if you were to really pursue it and say, I'm going to figure it out, why that one? Why pneumocystis carinea ever happened? If you could disentangle it from all the rest of them and get some research funding to try to find out why certain people die these days of pneumocystis carinea, you probably could. It's probably just another goddamn disease. It was a result, probably, of a type of a life that had not been lived too much in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and probably not much ever before. Whether it was the drug use, the lack of sleep, the poor nutrition, the tremendous number of contacts with other humans, and sexual contacts is simply the least of those, by the way. The gregarious contacts of any kind with human beings will get you the flu. Okay, most viruses do not respect the gender or the genital organs of us because they're such small things and so very seldom used. They go for our lungs. Okay, I mean, that's one of the first things they made the mistake. I said, why do they think it's just venereal? Because we don't know any viruses that are. And viruses, you know, they don't live here because they're fat and rich. They live here because they're lean and clever. And if you go for the genitals when you could be going for the lungs, you're a pretty dumb virus. Right? I mean, because we blow air out. You get in an elevator with somebody. You know what? The CDC wouldn't want to be saying that, but they don't have any evidence at all. Now they've said deep kissing. On the basis of one person. But the disease is real, AIDS, but it's not a disease. The fact is real that when you start having a life that pays very little attention to the stuff your mother and your grandmother would have said, you got to have this, you got to have that. You can goddamn go out and be a Democrat if you want to, but you've got to eat and you got to sleep. And they would have said, I mean, you stop doing those things, which a lot of people did. In a really large, big way. And I mean, the people that live next door to me in Berkeley started looking real sick a few years after they started coming over to San Francisco at night to the bathhouses. And I don't think it had to do with the disease they got. I think it was because they didn't eat or sleep. And drugs figures into it because the only way to live without eating or sleeping is to take amphetamines to stay at work and to take downers and stuff to go to sleep between 4 and 6. You know, and then you don't have much of an appetite, and you get skinny, and you get pale, and it's fashionable, and so it's okay. But that will lead to diseases eventually, probably, unless we're real lucky.
Also, in our history, we've never had the sexual and the psychedelic revolution the way we had it in the 60s. At the end of
Hopefully neither one were harmful. I would rather let that alone. You know, we don't have anything saying either one of those things were bad for us. They were emotionally involving, and we see things like that big, close-up, and important. Okay? I think nutrition and sleep are the first ones. Psychedelics and television and whatever, and sex if you want to get into that. But, you know, sex has been around a long time. Didn't seem to hurt us. It's in fact necessary.
But the combination...
It'd be bad if it turned out to be lethal, wouldn't it?
Esai,
Yeah.
the question about increased immune suppression, certainly there's been an increase in HIV testing since the early 80s. Right now, a third of the people who develop AIDS in the United States didn't have any immune suppression or any other AIDS symptoms until they started taking AZT. So certainly that's one factor that didn't exist prior to the 1980s, the consumption of AZT, which I'm convinced is a cause of AIDS and maybe the primary cause of AIDS today.
I just wanted to say, too, that something that was really revealing to me, I was at a PLUS seminar where I'm no longer welcome, sponsored by LA Shanti Foundation. And I was there learning about what it meant to be HIV positive, how long I could expect to live, and at that time they granted me 5 years. And this was based on a slide that we were being shown, and the slide information was gathered from something noted in an asterisk, which was the San Francisco Gay Men's Study. I had looked at that before I was at that seminar that day and had noted that the people who originally studied in creating this HIV/AIDS hypothesis were this group of people that had also been involved with experimental vaccines for hepatitis and had had many and concurrent venereal disease infections, had had parasitic infections, bacterial infections, amoebas, parasites, hepatitis A, B, I don't know if they were doing C back then or not, had not practiced good nutrition, had not done anything that would remotely keep them alive, and the fact that they were very, very ill, completely depleted, and on their last legs of living before anybody ever bothered to give them a diagnosis of AIDS was never mentioned until I raised my hand and said, for those of us who haven't lived like that, who haven't spent 10, 12 years on antibiotics and done crystal meth a whole lot and gotten everything with an idia or an emia on the end, what does this information have to do with us? And the doctor looked at the floor for a few seconds and said, absolutely nothing, because these are a very particular group of people that were studied to come to this HIV/AIDS hypothesis, and the mistake was very great in trying to say that everyone would become sick like they did, because they did a lot of things to make themselves sick.
Yeah. Also, another thing is, what we see on television and newspaper reports as the spread of AIDS is not one criteria. In other words, before 1987, they had a different definition. So that in 1986, you had more deaths of AIDS than in 1987. It started peaking already. I think people realized the lifestyle. They closed the bathhouses, and a lot of people started taking much better care of themselves. So in order to allay the fears that this thing would be going down, or to change the impression that this was being conquered already, they changed the definition, added a whole new set of diseases, brought up the number of T cells, and all of a sudden, overnight, it doubled the amount of people that were now considered AIDS. Now, if we keep redefining this thing, including more and more diseases, in other words, growing the net larger and larger, we're not finding something that's truly growing. We're growing the criteria with which we measure. So that's not, it's deceptive. Let's, another question or comments? You guys were saying something over there. It looked pretty provocative.
Isa, there was a lady over here.
So what you're saying is that immunodeficiency in human beings, of course, exists. I mean, it could happen to anybody, not necessarily because of their sexual partners or a drug transfusion. But then isn't there, in effect, no cure for AIDS? If it is something like because of your lifestyle or the chemicals in the water or this or that, that has beaten down an individual's immune system, and I'm not grouping anybody, not a homosexual, not a drug user, just an individual that has had their immune system so weakened because of their lifestyle, then there would not necessarily be a cure or even a place to look for a cause.
But there is. It's in looking at the individual. Because what is called AIDS in one person is called AIDS in another person is a completely different thing. If you're a woman, you test HIV positive and you have a yeast infection, that's called AIDS. If you're a man and you test HIV positive and you have pneumonia, that's also called AIDS. When we're not looked at as individual people, we all get the same treatment, a toxic chemotherapy called AZT. When you're looked at in an individual, you get treatment for your pneumonia. Now, a regular normal person who's tested HIV negative receives pneumonia treatment, and they're told to go home, take a rest, take some time off work. They're not told to fill out your will, get ready to die, sign up with an AIDS organization, it's all over with, nobody's going to want to touch you again, check out. That's where the problem is we treat everybody the same. There's 30 different illnesses and conditions that are listed under the category of AIDS. AIDS is not a disease, as many people think. It's a category. Just like I was doing an analogy with someone the other day, housewares. You can't hold a houseware. You can have a blender or a dish, but there's no such thing as a houseware. There's no such thing as AIDS. There's only the blenders and the dishes and the pneumonias and the tuberculosis and all that stuff that goes in there. If you treat the person who is sick and leave alone those who have simply tested positive and well, there is no let's hope for a cure, let's wait for a cure, let's pray for a cure. The cure is here. And you can restore an immune system that has not been taken so far astray by the destruction of the bone marrow and the spleen and the liver and all that other stuff that AZT and all these wonderful drugs that AIDS organizations bring us and push on us. You can get better. There are many people who have and many people who stay well once they stop doing that. And you also need to, in a certain sense, get rid of what's in here, which causes a tremendous spiritual death. You tell somebody they're going to die, the lights go out. There's no hope for tomorrow. And every morning when you get up, I went through this. You know, my hair is falling. Oh my God, it's a cancer pimple. It's not a pimple. You know, you expect the worst of everything. And in this paradigm of AIDS, there is no way out. Everything is called a result of HIV. And I'm not joking. I read an article once that said a buildup of earwax is symptomatic of HIV. There's a young woman who called us, the pregnancy stories, again, I'm collecting them. This woman who called us who's pregnant and she just had her baby. We got her off AZT luckily, and the kid was actually born without the typical hole in its chest or 6 fingers, or it had to be therapeutically aborted or aborted itself. The child was born and we hope it's going to be all right. In her subsequent visits to the doctor, she was told that the moles that she had developed during her pregnancy were symptomatic of HIV. I'm in a prenatal class out in Simi Valley. Half the women in there are whining about moles during pregnancy because it's something that happens. Their names are Tammy and they've never tested positive. So nobody puts this crap on them. But it's a very hard thing to live with. To be told that you're supposed to die, and to have everything that you turn on television and every magazine that you open tell you that too. So you've got to recover in 2 ways. 1, find a doctor that's going to treat you like a human being, and 2, get enough information to believe that you have the right to be here and get well because you can.
Could,
Yeah.
Disease as
Yeah.
anybody else.
Yeah, somebody who's HIV positive can get over their yeast infection just like anybody else can. Somebody who's got pneumonia and is tested HIV positive can get over their pneumonia just like anybody else can. The trick is don't get into the system that pushes chemotherapy on you. A cancer patient does not get chemotherapy every day for the rest of their life. Nobody here is going to get cancer chemotherapy as a prevention of cancer that may occur 10 years down the line. That's what's screwing people up. That's what's making the difference between getting better and getting dead.
I would also like to add, if I could, real quickly, that and it may be semantics for a lot of people in here, but at least for me, it's extremely important. I think that it's very necessary to be cautious with the kind of words that we use. This cure word is a silly notion that feeds us all into a path along what Kary was referring to earlier when he was discussing, why are you listening to the white coat and you're looking to him to do something. All that we need to be concerned with here is healing. And no more do we talk about healing. We talk about the cure. Be here for the cure. Well, there isn't going to be a cure. There's healing, and that's all there is. And I think that we need to be very, very careful with how I spent many, many years of my life trying to find something that was killing me. There wasn't anything there.
There's no cure.
And in that process, there was no healing occurring.
There's no one disease specific to HIV. You have a question?
I was going to ask you about the virus that has been passed on to the children of pregnant mothers, of babies born to. Are you saying that the treatment that they have received is what has created AIDS?
The babies that are born to women who test positive oftentimes will test positive when they're born, and that's because babies are born without an immune system. That's why the World Health Organization tells us that if women around the world would just breastfeed, we'd decrease the rates of infant mortality tremendously, because they would avail themselves to the mother's natural protective system, which becomes the baby's own for a while, through antibodies. So these babies get antibodies to everything when they're breastfed, and sometimes just through being born and all that kind of stuff. When the kids test positive for antibodies, many times they're put on AZT and other drugs that, yes, turn them into AIDS victims and kill them and deplete them. If left alone, 70 to 90% of these kids will test HIV antibody negative within the first 18 months of life as they develop their own immune system. Plus, even if they don't test HIV negative after 18 months, it's not said that that won't happen further along the way. Many children have. There's a couple who adopted a Romanian orphan, and it took her a while to start testing negative. She's fine, but she was put on AZT for a while, and it caused tremendous pain. She stopped growing. She got sick. Her hair was falling out. The usual chemotherapy
She
stuff.
had AIDS.
She had AIDS by virtue of the prescription of AZT. But it's a terrible thing when we live in a country that says, if you're pregnant, don't have a beer. Don't take aspirin. Don't take anything, and stay away from secondhand smoke, but load up on chemotherapy. because somehow that'll do you some good. And it is completely wrong. And the focus of many, many AIDS organizations is pediatric AIDS, because it's kind of a safe, warm, happy little place. It's all about babies and stuff. Well, these people are slaughtering babies is what it comes down to.
Yeah,
I
who's
mean,
gonna
it's really
turn-
sad and awful, but that's what they're doing. They're telling mothers that they have to take these drugs, and these drugs are lethal. If it's not Thursday, it'll be 2 years from now, but the kids will suffer from this.
Based on, by the way, fraudulent studies by the makers. Again, we have Glaxo Wellcome, Burroughs Wellcome, testing AZT